everyone, to the Access November Community Chat. My name is Naomi Lindsay, and I am a third year in the College of Social Work with a minor in criminology. I have one child. His name is Dominic, and he might be in the background, just a heads up. He's 6 years old, and he's literally the apple of my eye. I'm also the Vice President of Students with Children and also Moana Funzi. And I would like to thank you all for joining us today. So before we get started, I would like to briefly share with you a little about the Access program at OSU and the purpose behind our monthly community chats. The Access program is an academic and social support program to assist parenting students who are pursuing a college education at The Ohio State University. We offer a variety of services to the parenting students in our program, such as programming on parenting and life skills, childcare and housing aid, and scholarship opportunities. Since 2005, our program has organized and offered the National Student Parent Support Symposium, with the purpose of bringing together students, community, and higher education professionals to discuss best practices when supporting post-secondary parenting students and their families. In May of 2020, we hosted the National Parent Support Symposium virtually. These webinars are available on the website until April 2021. We welcome you to leverage these videos to help inform your organizations and institutions on matters that concern parenting students in higher education. So, to continue the conversations from the symposium, these monthly community chats are here to evoke impactful and thoughtful-provoking discussions and conversations. Today, you will hear a presentation from our guests. Then we will engage in a discussion-based Q&A session with our presenter and all of you. With that being said, I would like to introduce our presenter. Today, we have Carolyn Peguero Spencer.
Great job.
I was nervous, I got it. Carolyn is a PhD student at Fordham University School of Social Service, a part-time assistant professor at Orange County Community College, and
Delphi.
University.
Yep, you got it.
University. Carolyn is also a practicing bilingual licensed clinical social worker in a private practice in New York. Her doctoral research investigates the intersectionality of Latina single mothers, characteristics of persistence towards secondary degrees in community college, and the implications of Latino culture, motherhood with respect to academic competition. She takes multidisciplinary approach and draws from gender studies, sociology, economics, and critical race theory scholars. She holds a master's degree in social work from Fordham University in New York and a master's degree in psychology from Marist College in, y'all, I'm not gonna lie, this word.
No, it's Poughkeepsie, New York. It's a tough
Poughkeepsie,
one.
New York. See, I love New Yorkers. They're just so nice when you mess something up. They're like, I got you. It's Poughkeepsie,
Yep.
New York. She recently co-authored a journal article investigating diversity in social work, doctoral education in the United States. And I would like to introduce Miss Carolyn.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Naomi. You did great. You did great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen because I have 30 minutes to chit chat with you. So I want to make sure that I get to the most important parts. Okay, so this presentation is going to be a conversation on invisible barriers to persistence for Latina student mothers. What I did initially was I went through terms that if you are not Latino or not Hispanic, it's overwhelming to find out what people want to be called sometimes. So I just wanted to give you just a little lay of the land on how we got here. So the word Hispanic, some people might have an issue with it because it has a lot of undercurrents of colonization. It comes from Spain, so you might get a little pushback depending on who you're talking to if they want to be called Hispanic or not. The term Latino from Latino America, it also includes Brazil. Brazil typically they don't speak Spanish, so a lot of times they're not included in many things, but they would be considered Latino. This is important. This third PowerPoint, this third bullet point here, because with Spanish, we use a lot of masculine, feminine categorizations in order to speak properly. And I say that because the next term for Latinos, it grinds people's gears only because this is very academic. It is not, Latinx is not used outside of academic circles, pretty much. So the term is to, to show respect to those who want gender neutrality. For the purpose of my presentation, I'm going to be using the term Latina because I'm speaking about cisgender females who have children. And that's going to be the focus of this presentation. Okay, so some bullet points just to ground us. 1 in 5 women in the United States is Latina. There are 3 million families in the United States headed by Latina mothers. Let me just minimize this. And 34 are living below poverty level. The reason that this is important is because what I want to share is the role of the Latina as a daughter, as a mother, as a citizen, and where she falls with economic power and economic social mobility. So this last bullet point, according to a 2010 study, the net worth of a single Latina woman is $120 compared to white single women, which are cumulative, like if they own a car, if they own a house, if they, their education would be 41,500. This is significant, especially during the prime years of when they're earning for Social Security and when they're of childbearing age. Okay, and this is the chart here. So according to this chart, you have non-white, non-Hispanic cohabitation. This is their median wealth. For our purposes right here, the Hispanic woman, 120, compared to the single man, which would be 9,700. This also lends and gives a bird's eye view or maybe a bigger view to the gender pay gap.
Hey, Carolyn, are you able to make
Yes.
your PowerPoint full size so they can like see that chart a little better?
Okay. Oh gosh. All right. I think, how's that? Let's
Yep,
see.
you
How's
got it.
that? Okay, good. All right. So for those of you who needed to see this, I'm sorry that I'm going so fast. I just want to make sure that I give you all the important information. So here it is for the single woman Hispanic. And, just comparatively speaking, a single male, significantly different, significantly different, which speaks to the gender pay gap for Latina females. Okay. So this also is very important, at least for this presentation, when we're talking about Latinas trying to complete degrees or persist in getting degrees. Latinas are overrepresented in service industries, such as food service, cleaning professions. If we're looking now at COVID and the pandemic, there's no sick pay, there's no stay home pay. They're considered essential workers unequivocally, and there's no health care for certain situations. And I'm sure when this vaccine comes in, there's going to be limitations to who can get it and who can't. Okay, so 8% of single mothers who enroll in college programs complete a degree within 6 years. This is not this might be new news to some, but it's not new news to us. 19% of these single student mothers are Hispanic women. And by the age of 31, only 21% of Latina women have earned a bachelor's degree. Why this is important, if you look at longitudinally the lifespan of a Latina woman, this is how we end up in poverty, because we have a long lifespan, but a very short window of earning and a very short window of, you know, education. Okay, so let me just go I'm just going to put this up here. So, for the Latino culture, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a very collectivist society, very collectivist structure. We are not individualist. It is frowned upon for the most part. For those of us who have not assimilated to American culture, everybody goes together in a group. And when somebody has something going on in their family, everybody's expected to be there. Because of colonization, the majority of the religion might be Catholicism. All right. Familismo is a term that in traditional Latino culture, you're putting your family's needs above everything else. That dedication and commitment, it's unspoken, and going against it might, it has dealt with mental health issues, guilt, depression, even being ostracized sometimes from family when an individual wants to do something that might not be traditional within the family. The term respeto, you start that from the minute you're born. You defer to elders. You do not say their first name. You do not speak to elders as peers. You do not speak to professors or doctors with a tú. You use the term usted, you use the term doctor, you use the term licenciado. You use terms that defer respect, defer professionalism, and that's hearing children speak to an adult by their first name. It would be seen as that child does not have proper upbringing. Okay, so the gender roles. Machismo, I'm gonna assume most people have heard about that, whether in songs or whether just talking. Machismo is a term that for the male, it's typically seen negatively in American culture, and a lot of machismo in Latin America. It shows that the man is aggressive, the man, you know, knows his woman, dominates his house, and you know he doesn't mess around, right? He's the man. The other, that's the dark side of machismo. The other side of machismo is somebody who's had a household, somebody who's a financial provider, somebody who protects their family, somebody who goes out if their daughter's out on a date and they stay up and expect, you know, that person to walk to the door and introduce themselves before they take anybody in that family out. That's the other side of machismo. Marianismo is this term specifically looking at the Virgin Mary. The characteristics of a Marianista female is self-sacrificing, a virgin until married, submissive. Motherhood is the apex, nothing more virtuous than being a mother. Everything is devoted to the family, to the activities, above all else. The dark side of it is that there is no identity for the Latina woman when she commits to Marianismo. Um, there's an identity crisis that happens. Okay. So with this slide, what I want to highlight is this right here, this bullet point right here. Cohabiting and single fathers are less likely to live in poverty compared to single Latina mothers. Again, this is speaking to the pay gap and also the socialization of women, or specifically Latina mothers, that they have to stop whatever they're doing once they become a mother to attend to that child. And that might be if they have a job, if they're going to school. In most communities, in most families, it is expected that they wait till their children or their families move up ahead before these Latina mothers can take care of themselves. And here, Hispanic females have been found to the dropout rate from college. compared to other ethnicities. It's significant. Okay, with this slide, I wanted to highlight here, you're looking at single fathers. This is the age of the single fathers, the ethnic breakdown, the education level. With single mothers, 43% of single mothers living at below poverty rate, the average income of a single mother compared to a single father or a father cohabitating with someone else, um, and the age. Again, this is significant because this is directly implicated to children living in poverty, especially when they're headed by single mother households. Oh, this is not a typo, folks. That is 200 years from now. We are expected to have equal pay. 200. So none of us on this call will be seeing that if this is the way this goes. So it, there's a very delicate balance with the culture that is expected of Latinas, completing an education, and economic mobility. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the PowerPoint. So with Marianismo, studies have been found in the studies that there have been a positive correlation with Marianismo and the high rates of depression. Also, studies have found that with Hispanic mothers, they reported higher stress levels in parenting compared to white mothers. And it's due to, again, poverty, the structural disadvantage, single mothering, um, the connection, and culture, this third bullet point here, this cannot be emphasized enough. When you are either mentoring or helping a Latina mother try to complete school, if you don't understand the culture and you're looking at this as through a very individualized lens, you're going to miss the whole point. The amount of guilt that happens with a Latina having to write a paper or going to a baptism or having to see somebody who's sick in a hospital or having a paper, there's a high probability that that Latina will probably not write that paper and go visit the family member or go do what's expected of her, which will cause deterioration in the academic setting. So here I put this picture, I found this, I gave the credit to Google, of the many roles that Latinas play, just in one role. I wanted to talk a little bit about William Good. He's credited for a theory called role strain. Um, William Good looked at society and he explored what different roles people play in society. And what he found was that in society, it's normal to have very different roles. And when you have this different amount of roles, you might experience role strain, which means that you're expected to be a student, you're expected to be a new parent, you're expected to be a new worker, and all these things are normal and they're healthy, and you're gonna have to navigate between that. What I found interesting is that this is exactly what happens, and I'm speaking specifically to Latinas, however, without the cultural guilt or the expectation that if they don't fulfill this role, the entire family, it will have repercussions on the entire family. Another addition to his theory is role conflict, which talks about that you have two roles that are competing with each other, and they might be diametrically opposed, which is one being a very dedicated student and one being a single mother. And especially with COVID, you could see role conflict in every call. If you have been at, you see people taking classes at home, you see their children in the background, they either have to leave their screen black, you see papers coming in late, you see people maybe having to minimize the type of work, not checking emails at a certain time. Role conflict, especially for single mothers and Latina single mothers, at least from what I've seen, can really challenge mental health. significantly because of the collectivist expectations that Latina culture has. All right, so I don't know how I'm doing on time, Jillian, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the links of cultural influences, especially when a Latina becomes a mother. Again, this is passed down where the role of motherhood is apex, tantamount, and anybody who is coaching, mentoring a Latina without taking into consideration the role that they play as a daughter or the role that they play to their siblings if they're first generation, is missing a big chunk of persistence and degree attainment. That conversation has to happen. The link between negative Marianismo, the beliefs of, this complete commitment, this fatalistic ideology that, I might not be able to complete my degree because my family comes first. I don't know if I'll ever be able to think about myself because my family comes first. This silent surrender has high uptick with depression and the demands on the child's well-being. Also, not being able, you saw what it looks like for equal pay for Latinas 200 years from now. So if we were to look at that just even today, education attainment is the number one pathway, at least for now, in order to get out, or at least to move ahead of poverty just for a little bit. And it's important that mothers, at least Latina mothers, have the support and understand that they're going to have to adjust or adapt or just look at different things in order to complete. So I wanted to share some recommendations for those who are working with Latinas, student mothers, those working with Latinos in general, especially Latina mothers, school advisors. So just become aware of the cultural beliefs. And again, I'm speaking from a lens of assuming that Latinos, the ones that you're working with, Latina mothers, have this culture dedication. There might be people who have assimilated, who are several generations down, who might not have this. I'm speaking specifically to those students who do have this. This is important that you understand how culture works. For those who don't understand that mothering, what it does to somebody, at least the studies that I have seen, they pathologize, or studies looked at the pathology of what happens when mothering goes wrong. But I don't think enough study has been done looking at what happens to a person when they become a mother. There's an identity crisis that happens initially until that person can gain themselves back. And if there's a lot of guilt involved with not being the type of mother that society expects you to be, that's even worse. And if you're a poor mother, there's a lot of guilt with poverty and mothering that I don't think we look at enough without the pathology. And we should look at it more structurally. As for help for single moms, referrals, and you ask for tutoring, learn how to plan your time. It might be an all fail. The day might get ahead of you. You might lose control of the day. Figure out, it's normal. Look at what this pandemic has done to people who have had their lives together. We're just gonna have to adjust and figure it out and not look at it as a personal flaw, but just constantly readjusting. Understanding the developmental stages that come with mothering and motherhood, and the developmental stages of the child. And I also included here adverse childhood experiences. I'm not going to talk about that a lot, but I think it's important if you're working with somebody that they introduce that to you, to see historically where you stand on that, or just biologically how you produce stress, how that affects you, and how what things can happen. So I'm going to stop sharing because I think this is it. Yes, that's it from me. I don't know, Jillian. Okay, there we are. So with that being said, I think I've used up my time. So Jillian.
Yep. I'm here for you. You're doing great. Hi, everybody. I'm Jillian Dees. I am a parenting student and graduate assistant for the Access Collaborative program. I'm really happy you guys are all here today. And Carolyn, thank you for coming back with us um, and sharing this really important and imperative work that you're doing and focusing on Latina student mothers. Before we get started with our questions and discussion, I want to bring one more person into this conversation. So I want to take a moment and introduce Yolanda Zepada. She is our Assistant Vice Provost at the Ohio State University Office of Diversity and Inclusion. She leads the university-wide efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in faculty recruitment and hiring processes. She promotes the adoption of model practices and the recruitment and advancement of students of underrepresented groups. Yolanda facilitates institutional collaborations, partnerships, and community outreach to expand access for groups historically underrepresented in higher education. She also oversees a wide range of targeted programs that promotes the full inclusion of students from diverse backgrounds, which include Latinx student success programs, single parent students, students in STEM, support for women of color. Yolanda oversees the campus magazine Que Pasa Ohio State, a publication that highlights Latinx scholarship and activity. This year, this magical year of 2020, with all of its great energy, Yolanda was awarded the Prospenica.
Hispanica?
Yeah, Comunidad Award.
They kind of made up that word, so.
Perfect. And you won this award for your contributions to support and inspire members of the Columbus Latinx community. So with that being said, I'm happy you both are here to engage in this conversation with us. I just realized I forgot to share my screen, which had your beautiful picture there, Yolanda. I'm sorry. Okay, so let me pull up my questions. I have a few questions that are ready to go. So firstly, I want to ask you both, what has been your experience in furthering or advancing like research or higher ed spaces for Latinx populations, but also Latina populations?
So, okay. So thank you, Jillian. That's a great question, actually. And I think a really important question for a place like Ohio State. So in my role in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, much of our work is focused on direct programs for students, but we also are investing to support faculty and staff and leadership development on the campus at large. So while we don't actually hire faculty, and so the first thing would be, of course, to identify strategic scholarship areas and then really build up the faculty expertise in those areas, because you don't want to hire individuals who are going to find themselves in a desert in terms of academic scholarship without colleagues and peers to support that research. So that's really a message for deans. Build those spaces and those networks of scholars who can support research in these areas. But there are some very real things that we do within our office and that we can do. So one of the things that Dr. Moore, our Chief Diversity Officer, has done is really expanded the numbers of faculty appointments that we share. So we have faculty who are leading various initiatives within our office, but they also have a tenured faculty home out in their department. And what that does is help them have a community of support with the expertise here and also access to our students here, but also keeps them engaged fully in their academic communities in their departments. So that's one thing. Another thing we do is give support to faculty. So we've partnered with a couple of faculty members over just most recently, junior faculty. We've given them some funds to pursue whatever kinds of outreach or research, enhance their research accounts, or just really letting them decide what's the best way that they can use this money. And some of them use those funds to take students, a team of students, to conferences, research conferences that are focused on Latinx communities, professional communities. So that's another thing. And then the third thing, of course, which is very important, is to support student development, support the pipeline all the way through. So we are both internally, we support the success of students through some of our leadership development programs and target uh, curriculum and programming to Latinx students that's sensitive and really relevant to their needs, but also going out to other communities. So the Hispanic Association for, let's see, AHI, American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education, is a national organization dedicated to Latinos in higher ed. And we took a team of 18 last year, faculty, staff, undergrads, graduate students, and we all presented, and we hosted a conference, a reception, and really tried to build those connections to encourage more faculty to think about coming and starting their careers at Ohio State. So that's sort of a broad array of things that we're doing.
Jillian, do you want me to further that question, or do you want to move on?
No, I think it's good to further this because Yolanda's playing the side of one angle of the higher ed institution. And I would love to hear your experience as well as a PhD student coming into research. And how
Absolutely. So with researching this, what I'm finding is it's either looked at as so foreign and so specific that the PhD world is very canonic, like that doesn't step in line with what the research shows. So there is another theory called trenzas of identidad, which means braids of identity. That's the other version of role stream. But if I was to use trenzas, if I was to use language that is unfamiliar, I might alienate myself in being less scholarly. So what we're trying to do is by exposing this, by sharing different identities of what this looks like, we also want to be part of the scholarly conversation. And it doesn't have to be so esoteric and so culturally, foreign from academia. So that's how I'm seeing it.
I really appreciate that, Carolyn. There is a whole vocabulary that has grown up around research on Latinas, particularly in higher education, that is very useful to us. But if you don't know the culture and if you're not immersed in that literature, you're not going to understand it.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're here today, right? That's why we're having this conversation, because trying to understand this research. I know we have a few researchers here on the call with us who are like, this really complements and adds to the body of especially parenting student research that focuses on this really, broad set of barriers that exist. But as you pointed out in your presentation, Carolyn, there is a lot of other barriers that sometimes can take hierarchy over the daycare issue, right? Yes. I know we talked personally, like, okay, you can go to school all you want, but if you miss the birthday party, you have a bigger issue.
Yeah, and when we're looking at this academically speaking and scholarly speaking, not all chains are visible, right? Not all chains are created by environment. There are expectations of you as a daughter, of you as a wife, of you as a partner, especially in the Latino community, that they really don't care what your paper's about. They don't care. They don't care.
I would like to say something to that, if I could, just offer my own personal experience. And this is something that I recognize myself very much in your presentation, Carolyn. But when I went to college, this happened at an undergraduate level and it happened in graduate school. And full disclosure, I am ABD. I did not finish my dissertation. And it was classic, Carolyn, what you were talking about. I was married to someone who, when he was writing his dissertation, kicked his girlfriend out, found a home for his dog, moved out on his own, right? When I was writing my dissertation, he brought his mother over, who was blind and declining mental health and needed 24/7 care. I had to feed her and care for her. And while it was a great honor to be able to do that work for her, I couldn't do that plus work and write my dissertation. But just backing up, throughout, I had performed when I came into graduate school, I performed at a very high level and made very quick progress. And all the faculty said, she's got it together. She knows what she's doing. Nobody ever asked. And because of all those things in our culture that you identified, I never raised my hand. I never asked for help. I just quietly left. I was gone from I had moved out of state for 2 years before they even noticed that I wasn't there anymore. And so for all of you, if you have opportunities to mentor or supervise Latinas, be sure you ask, because they're not always going to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm drowning here.
Yeah. And there's a term for that. And for those of you on the call, I don't know when we're using these terms interchangeably. I know if you don't speak Spanish, you're like, oh, what did that mean? But there's a term called la sufrida, which means the one that suffers. So for American culture, you would see it as, oh, how dramatic, or, oh, how fatalistic. That might not look so dramatic the way it looks in novelas. For you in your for people, it might just look at somebody who's just real quiet, who's really saying, I'm gonna quit tomorrow.
Yeah.
I just can't. I don't have a babysitter. I didn't go to the party. Now my mother's not talking to me. Now I don't have daycare.
Right.
That's what that might look like. And there's a lot of literature now on, Marianismo, La Sufrida, all these archetypal roles that play a role.
And can I add one more thing, Carolyn, and this is in regards to your research. So not only are there terms, cultural terms that we need to build into the scholarship, but also methodology, research methodology. And I wonder if you could say something about that in the way that you've done research, or some of the folks that you work with. I know Dr. Segura, who is your advisor?
My advisor is Dr. Jai. So
okay.
yeah.
So how does that work?
So this is what I love. Dr. Jai is Chinese. There's a lot of cultural sameness where the family comes first. And the difference is that he's a male. So the support for him leaving his family ahead is absolutely bow down. When you come from a matriarchal woman, you're battling with that machismo. That's not always good. The men feel emasculated in many Latina families when the woman is more educated. I don't know how it works in other cultures, but I know in Latino cultures, when the woman is far educated or scholarly and she's not working a blue collar job, or she's doing different things, things start happening. It's a lot
were
of
there any challenges to research methodologies or your approach?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. That was your question. So for me, I'm using secondary data, right? It's qualitative data would be more appropriate, but for me, time is of the essence because of my demands. And I chose to do secondary data just so I could complete and finish. And that was my negotiation.
Smart. So Jillian, I think it's back in your court.
Yes.
Jillian, she's having a couple of technical difficulties. So while she is getting that straightened out, I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple of questions that were in the chat for you both, Carolyn and Yolanda. So we have a question from Tara, and she asked, what cultural aspects should clinicians consider when diagnosing, specifically for depression or PTSD?
Do you want to go, Yolanda?
No, I think that's your
that's my wheelhouse. Okay.
Yes.
so this is I included in this presentation the Marianismo belief scale. For those who are working with Latinas, I think looking at those type of questions, you don't have to have the individual complete the belief scale, but just look at the type of questions and look at the demands that these questions, how does that person respond to these questions? And I have to tell you, people don't understand the amount of guilt that is carried when you have a role like a dutiful daughter and you choose to go to school as opposed to doing something dutiful. That lingers, and that guilt, sometimes you have to create such boundaries that it separates you from the family for a little bit. Those are the things that you have to look at. And assimilation, there's a lot of pain in assimilation. There's a lot of pain in that. So besides the PTSD, the acculturation, assimilation, that's where I would go before anything else, just seeing where they are with that, so they can negotiate that.
Yeah, I'll just add a note to that too. Sometimes you don't recognize it. I will say when I was an adult already and when I graduated from college and I was looking for doctoral programs, my father told me not to leave Texas, that if I leave Texas, he would have a heart attack and die and it would be my fault. And as a matter of fact, in my second year, as I was starting my second year of doctoral study in Indiana, he did have a heart attack. And that heart attack left him paralyzed from the neck down. And that also, there was a lot of there were feelings of guilt and pressure on the choices that I'd made. And I had a 10-year period when I had very little contact with my family. And this came in the middle of it. And so balancing my commitments to family, to my husband at the time, and to my parents, and that honoring the family, those can just really do a number, and you often don't recognize what's happening. So being able to have a trusting relationship and probe is that it's just really important to have that, to be able to form those trusting relationships. And if you come in with a set of cultural assumptions that are insensitive to what the clients are dealing with, you're not going to get that information because they won't share that.
Okay, thank you both. I have another question from the chat. Are there any online peer groups or resources where Latino moms can connect with each other about role strain or conflict, especially during COVID with remote learning? I would appreciate any positive support options for Latino student-to-student connections.
So from what I know, unless it's specifically like clinical, I don't know of any safe, because there's a lot of peer groups that are open. You have to be really careful for them being safe, because you could get a lot of information that could make you feel worse, or you just have to be careful.